Hi, I'm Pablo, and this is Sidless. In today's lesson, I'll be going over a lot of the terminology you're going to need to understand in order to get a basic understanding and basic foundation of understanding for interpreting astrology. Now, in my last video, I kind of mentioned that there's a difference between astrology and astronomy, and I kind of just want to dig a little bit deeper into that right now. Before I get into these concepts right here, what you need to understand is when it comes to astrology, okay, so when the ancients were developing their own zodiac, and not just the one I'm be getting into, which is the common one, which is the Greek and Roman zodiac, even the Chinese astrology or the other types of astrology. I only mentioned two in the last video, but there are other versions. Like India has their own version. Um, Ancient Egypt had their own version with different animals. But the common theme between all of them is they use symbology to explain these concepts. And the reason that's important is because people tend to look at astrology and they take a lot of these things very literally. And today's lesson is kind of just like a quick overview of kind of the terms you're going to hear a lot. And I kind of just want to knock this out of the park. So as we get into the other videos, a lot of it makes more sense. I had mentioned that astrology studies non-quantifiable phenomenon. So since it's non-quantifiable, that implies that it's hard to describe, that it's very abstract. These are ideas and concepts that are not straightforward. So you kind of need a little bit of help in describing them. So a lot of these abstract concepts have a lot of images. They have a lot of associations with different, whether it be elements or planets or mythology and different characters within mythology. Like they use these associations to pretty much convey an idea of what this sign or planet, what it really means. All right, because you can't literally talk about some of this stuff. Now, as we get deeper into this series, I'll be going through each subject in order, and I'm just gonna let you know right now the order I'm gonna go in. I think the best way to learn astrology is to first focus on the different zodiac signs, because they're kind of like the flavors of energy that are hitting the Earth. Like in the last video, I mentioned like how you have different energies hitting the Earth at all times. Well, these are the different flavors they come in. Okay. Next would be the planets, which represent the different urges within each person. Like the sun represents your ego, moon represents the emotional side of you, Mars is like your drive, Venus is like your values, and so on and so forth. And each one represents a different part of the human experience. And we'll get into the next video because you can get really detailed with just the planets. After that, we'll focus on the houses, which is when you look at a natal chart and you look at that big old circle and it's divided up into little 30-degree sections. What those little sections mean are the different areas of your life which, that energy manifests. Houses can get a little complicated to explain if you don't first understand how the zodiac and the planets work. So we're gonna get into houses a little bit later. But after houses, we'll finally get into aspects, which is the energetic relationship between the different planets. Meaning, if, Venus represents your values, which is like what you're attracted to, the love planet, and then Mars is your drive or, what represents, your sexual drive. Aspects describe how like those two planets interact. If you look at a natal chart, you see all those crazy lines going all over the place. Astrologers kind of have certain degree angles. They understand that, if you look at the chart, this is where like a lot of geometry comes into play. That they measure the angle of, one planet's relationship to another. Like, if you have one planet at the very top of your chart and one that's like on the right, left, I don't know what verse, on that side of the chart, you notice that's a 90-degree angle. 90-degree aspects tend to be more difficult aspects versus one with like the planets were both on top of each other. Aspects kind of represent, where in your life things are going to be easier, and where in your life things will be a little bit tougher. Like with that 90-degree angle one I gave, that is considered a tough aspect, meaning those energies kind of hard to mesh well. So if you have a Venus up here and your Mars on the side, that means you're always going to struggle between love and sex. Like the type of people that you might find in love with might not be in line with the type of people you're attracted to sexually. Another version is like having one on one side and one on the other. That's considered an opposite. Let's say you have your sun here and your moon over here on the chart. Well, that's also considered a difficult aspect because your conscious mind ego, which is the sun, is always going to be in direct opposition of how your subconscious wants to operate. So when you get deeper into these subjects and you understand what the zodiacs are, what the planets mean, what house it is in, and then with the aspect, you can get a really good, thorough picture of your energetic makeup, your parameters. Now, the 12 signs of the zodiac represent 12 different archetypes, 12 different personality types. And when you get into it, you'll learn that no person is any one of these, to the T, because when you get into it, there's other planets, you have more than one sign. People only really know about their sun sign, which is the most commonly talked about, and it's the one that horoscopes are usually referring to. Your sun sign only represents one part of you. You can have your sun in Aries and then have your moon in other signs, and you realize that once you're able to compartmentalize those different energies within your own being, you'll be able to see why in certain situations you act more like this versus this, And the reason for that is because these archetypes, no one acts purely like it because you don't only have one, sign. I mean, the very rare astrological occasion that like all of your planets are in one sign, which is very, you ever seen Hercules and all the planets lined up perfectly in that one little, I'm talking about the Disney movie, but that one part of the movie where they all line up in there, well, that'd be like the really rare occasion that like you have all of them in one sign, all right? But as we know, that doesn't happen very often, and if it does, it still would be different because when you get into houses, you find out that the moment of the day you're born actually changes where part of your life these different energies are expressed. So even then, you wouldn't be an exact replica. So I'm gonna throw that out there because people tend to compare themselves to people of the same sign, and they're just like, well, I mean, I'm an Aries and they're an Aries, but we act very different. Oh, this is all bullshit, But that comes from a lack of understanding of that's only one layer to the cake that is you. That's only one layer of your onion. Like Shrek was. It's there's layers to people. All right, and as you get into these archetypes, it's best to understand how they are in their purest form. So when you peel off your layers, you can really see, okay, this layer of me is represented more by this sign, and this layer of me is represented different by this sign, and it blends and it mixes, and you get your own unique person, all right? And since all of the planets move around the sun at different speeds, if you were to do the math on it, in order for all of the planets and houses and all that to line up exactly the same way more than once, it's a big span of like 25,000 years. So when we say that you're unique, you are. There's literally no one's going to have the same chart as you for like another 25,000 years. All right, people tend to think like when they look into astrology, it's only 12 signs. Oh, there's more than 12 types of people. Oh, there's no way that could describe everybody. Well, I mean, it's 12 signs, but then there's also 10 planets, and then there's 12 houses, and it's not even getting into the aspects. And when you add all that into layers and layers, you get a very unique, specialized person, So now that we kind of understand that, let's go through each one of these. Aries is considered the baby of the zodiac. It's the first one. It's the start of spring, and ancients used to use Aries as a marker of the beginning of a new seasonal year. And as we go through this, you realize that these energies tend to have like a theme. Taurus, being the second sign, kind of continues where Aries left off, and it's the middle of spring. And with Gemini, we transition to the end of the season. Gemini represents the end of spring and the end of a season. And as we go through, you realize that that's kind of a theme throughout all the signs. With Cancer, start of the summer, Leo, middle of summer, Virgo, end of summer. Transition into Libra, same thing. Beginning of fall, middle of fall, end of fall. Transitioning into winter, in middle of winter, end of winter, and then you go all the way back up to the beginning of the seasons. All right. Now I'm gonna go more into like the symbology and the images that like the ram and the bull and all that in another video. In this one, I'm just gonna go over some of the more broad abstract ideas behind these signs. So within each sign, you'll realize that each sign has a duality. Each sign has a triplicity, and each one has a quadruplicity. Yeah, those last two are kind of hard to pronounce, so it's just easier to say element for the triplicities, and for this one, you can just say the quality of that element. So let's get into it. As far as dualities go, what this MF stands for is, as far as MF goes, I'm pretty sure you're familiar with the yin yang symbol, that there's polar opposites, that everything has a positive and a negative to it. That's in, that concept applies to not just astrology, it applies to like, physics. There's every atom has a positive and negative charge. There's a left and a right, there's an up and down, there's a hot and cold. Duality is literally seen throughout life. It's describing the polar opposites of two things. And in this case, the way in astrology it's described as masculine energy versus feminine energy. And it doesn't mean that, Aries having masculine energy means that all Aries are guys. Obviously there's female Aries, but it's more of that type of energy. The way masculine energy is described as being energetic and direct. They gain strength through action, as opposed to feminine energy, it's more passive and receptive. Not one's better than the other. I'll make that clear. All right. It's not that you want more masculine energy to get things done and feminine energy doesn't do anything. No, they both have their strengths and weaknesses. With feminine energy, they tend to be more on the passive side. They're more introverted, all right, type of energy. They get their strength through reflection and having emotional reserves of strength. So when you go through each sign, you realize that each one flips. It goes masculine, feminine, masculine, feminine, masculine, feminine, masculine, feminine, and so on and so forth. Within each sign, they have a duality. So, if you were to call it something else, that would be yang, yin, yang, yin, yang, yin, yin, yang. Even with our brains, they describe that our heads have duality. There's two hemispheres, right? You got, the right side of the brain that controls the left side of the body. You got the left side of the brain that controls the right side of the body. And they say that, it's old myth that like men use one part of their brain and females use one part of the brain. And, more recent times they've proven that that's not really true. Men and women both use both sides of their brain. However, where that misunderstanding came from was that, one side of your brain is more masculine in nature, while one side of your brain is more feminine in nature. Meaning there's one part of your brain that does more of the passive feminine qualities, more artistic side of yourself, versus the masculine side of yourself, which is more of like the analytical, sciencey type. And that's kind of an oversimplification, but that's kind of in a nutshell where the duality energies come into play. For the next slide, another layer of describing it is these triplicities is the elements. And I'm gonna do a whole nother video on elements. So in this one, I'm just gonna go over them real quick. We have fire, earth, air, and water. And as you notice, there's 4 elements, but there's 3 sections of them. That's where the triplicities comes into play. There's 3 sections of them. So Aries is masculine, fire, while Taurus is feminine earth. And as you go through it, you realize that all of the fire signs are masculine energy. All the air signs are masculine energy. So fire and air are masculine energies, but they're different types of masculine energies. Fire, you know, is more action oriented, where air is more on the intellectual side and communicating. And we'll go into deeper into both of those, but you know, go off that. Earth and water are the feminine sides, and earth is more of the practical, more of the down to earth people, while water is represented by emotion. So, you know, kind of get into some of the more stereotypical kind of labels they put on men and women when they describe masculine and feminine energies, is that women tend to be more emotional, which is where the feminine water comes into play. But that's kind of also a misunderstanding, because men can have a lot of feminine energy. You know, my chart personally actually have a heavy influence of water in my chart, so I tend to be more on the emotional side than, you know, your average guy, I guess. But as you realize, there's even women that have way more masculine energy than do. And that brings me to the last section we're going to cover in this video, which is the quality of each element. Now, there's 3 of each elements. There's 3 fires, 3 airs, 3 earths, 3 waters. The difference between all these elements is the quality. Now, there's 3 types of qualities. There's cardinal energy, there's fixed energy, and then there's mutable energy. Cardinal energy, if you look back at it, you know, associated with Aries, cardinal energies are the initiators. They are considered the jump starters. Cardinal energy always, as far as seasons go, begin a season. Like Aries is a cardinal sign, but it begins spring. And Cancer, also a cardinal sign, is the beginning of summer. And likewise, Libra, start of fall, cardinal sign. And then Capricorn, the very last cardinal sign, is the beginning of winter. So that kind of just gives you an idea of, you know, there's 4 cardinal signs, 1 of each element. So what all those different signs have in common is their ability to be able to start things. The fact that they're all at the beginning of a season, and the fact that, you know, they tend to be really good at starting things, but they're not always the greatest at finishing them. And that kind of leads me to, and that's kind of just a generic description. There's obviously more to it. But if you go to the next quality, which is fixed, all the fixed signs are all the ones in the middle of the season. Fixed literally means to hold position. So when it comes to fixed, these are the most stubborn of all the signs. Taurus, the bull, is literally known as being the most stubborn sign. And then, you know, Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius all have this element of stubbornness in their character, that when you're able to look at it in that light, you know, quality really kind of helps you see if, you know, if this is someone that's going to be good at starting a project, or if they'd be better at finishing it. Fixed signs are also known as being the finishers of the zodiac, meaning whatever the cardinals start, finish it. And that leads me to the last sign. If these are the starters and these are the finishers, mutable signs are like the chameleons of the zodiac. They're the changeable ones, the flexible ones, because the mutables always come at the end of a season. They're literally prepping for change. You know, Gemini, which is around end of May, beginning of June, we're transitioning from spring into summer. You know, that is a time of change. You are prepping for, you know, the next season. So mutable signs are the adaptable ones. So, you know, when you get into it and you want to start describing the different signs, Aries is a masculine fire cardinal sign. All right, and what you notice is there's no sign that has all 3 of these matching. Meaning, there's 3 fire signs, but it's the only cardinal one. And even though Leo is also a fire sign, it's actually fixed. And Sagittarius, which is my sign, is the mutable one. So, and that goes for each of them, and it helps you just kind of add another layer of description to the sign. All right, and this hasn't even gotten into the symbology of each one of these, but this is just like a nice big overview of, you know, once you understand deeply how fire works, you'll be able to understand and relate all the different fire signs. Once you understand how cardinal energy versus fixed energy is, you'll be able to identify the differences between the cardinal and the fixed signs. Um, so that really adds layers of depth to each sign. Um, like I mentioned that like fire and air, both of them are masculine, and earth and water are both feminine. Um, One way you can look at it is all the fixed signs, there's one from each element. So being stubborn is not necessarily of masculine or feminine energy. It can literally be expressed in either one of those dualities. Um, so with that being said, the energy is just expressed different. Like fire tends to be more of the action-oriented signs. They're the ones that are most flashy. Um, while earth signs tend to be, because it's a feminine quality sign, they're more introverted. They're more, practical. They're more stable. So if you wanted to compare the fire cardinal with the earth cardinal energy, Aries are tend to be loud. They're very action oriented. They're all in your face. They tend to be really good at, there's a lot of Aries in sports, which makes sense. It's all about physicality. It's all about moving, right? Well, Cardinal, because Capricorn, because it's more of it's a earth sign and it's got more feminine qualities in it. It's much more reserved. Capricorns tend to be known as like the workaholics of the zodiac. They're like, think of like I would say Donald Trump. That's not a good example. He's actually a Gemini, by the way. But like your stereotypical CEO in a business suit, right? Very stern, very serious. Worked his way to the top over a very long time. Despite Capricorn and Aries both being cardinal signs, the way they initiate it is different. While they're very action oriented, Capricorns are much more practical in the way they initiate things. Same thing with the other cardinal signs, water, which is the Cancer cardinal sign. Um, that sign, also initiator, but the way they approach it much more from an emotional standpoint or an intuitive standpoint, where they tend to be more of like the artist or the poet or the singer. There's a lot of actors that are Cancers, and you know, they also tend to be initiators, but they do it in a different way than the other elements. So as we get into this channel and I start to break down each sign specifically, I'm going to be referencing these different qualities. And, I'll probably do a video on each one of these just to give you more in-depth feel of, what it means to be masculine and feminine and the different elements and obviously the different qualities. And then we'll probably get into the zodiacs themselves, and it'll make so much more sense once you understand it like that. So I'm gonna end this video here. It's getting a little long. I'm gonna try just a quick update. I'm gonna try to keep a schedule of bringing these videos out every couple weeks. Still trying to get in the flow of how I want things edited and stuff like that. So expect these to come out on a semi regular basis. And another thing I want to point out is I'm doing an astrology class right now, but that's not the only subject I'm going to be covering on this channel. I'm starting with astrology just because I already have a pretty solid foundation of understanding on it and studying it for a few years now. And, it's something I could talk about for hours. So I kind of just started with this subject to get the ball rolling. But I'm beginning a lot of subjects that will reference things I talk about here with astrology, like ancient history, philosophy, science. All of those in a roundabout way come back and relate to astrology one way or another. And I chose astrology to start with because I just really feel like it's a good foundational class to start with. So for those that saw this channel and wanted to learn something other than astrology, don't worry. I'm going to get to those subjects. It's just not going to be immediate, all right? I will build my way up to it, and eventually I'll be covering a much more wide range of topics. But for now, you guys are going to have to settle with this, and I hope you guys are able to still learn something. So until then, see ya.